Hi there, I'm Cindy Sidwell. I'm a debate coach over at Skyline High School. This is my 12th year being a debate coach, and I've seen a lot of cool things happen in debate. Progressive LD has entered and become very controversial because of the progressive LD, but I just wanted to let you know that there are ways for a progressive to go against a traditional debater, and I'm going to let you know those things. In fact, most of my debaters, most of my LDers are absolutely just traditional LDers. That's what they've chosen to do. So, and in the end, they've had a lot of winning records. So that's just kind of who I am. I'm sure that there are people who are more qualified than me to do this, but I figure, hey, I'm going to throw it out there. And if I can help some people, some traditional LDers, then we're in good shape. Yay. All right. What is progressive LD? It's also called speed LD or policy LD in some parts of the United States, depending on where you are. I am in Utah. They use elements of policy debate in debate rounds. Now, most progressive LDers spew or they talk really fast, and they spread, so they throw out a whole bunch of arguments as well, hoping their opponents won't have enough time to go over every single card and attack it, and then they can win. So I just want to let you know that you traditional LDers can absolutely beat a progressive LDer, and here we go. All right. Strategies to debating a progressive LDer. The number one thing is to ask questions. Ask as many questions as you can. This is number one because the first strategy that progressive LDers like to use is confuse. Yes, which is also a Pokemon battle strategy with one of the Pokemon. I don't remember what that is. But anyway, okay. So I had a debater come back from Victory Briefs camp. This was maybe 8 years ago. And I had him run around against one of my other debaters, and we had no idea what was going on. We had no idea what he was running. We didn't know what his case was, what arguments he was running, right? And afterwards I said, hey man, I don't get your case. I don't get what you're doing. It needs to be clear for the judge. And with that, he said that this was a strategy that he learned at camp, which was to confuse the others, right? So if you have a progressive judge and a progressive LDer, they sort of speak the secret language that only the progressive judge gets and the traditional person doesn't get it. They make it very confusing, sometimes no value or value criterion, sometimes no contentions, but just cards that they throw out there. So what he said is they throw out this confusing case, and then in the next speech they get up and are like, hey, I speak English now, this is what's going on, so vote for me, because they didn't attack my case well, right? Which I think is kind of a really low blow and is the thing that's sort of like making a lot of traditional LDers quit. So progressive LDers, if you're listening to this, please don't do this. Make sure that the traditional LDer can compete against you. It should be the best debater who wins, not the one who confuses the most, right? And who has a coach who knows progressive LD, okay? Yeah. So what questions do you need to ask? The first is clarification with judges. Before the round begins, and you should know this, the number one thing if you want to win a round is to talk to your judge. What is their debate background? Are they former LDers? Did they like more of the traditional or more of the progressive? If they're a mom or dad judge, they aren't going to like the progressive anyway, my friends. So make sure that you're just explaining your arguments really well, right? With a traditional LDer, they usually hate progressive and will usually, hopefully they're still voting on arguments and not like, I hate spew, so I'm going to vote against you. But you've got a lot on your side. If you have a progressive LD judge, what you need to ask is it okay if I group arguments because I'm more of a traditional LD debater? Don't be snotty about this. Don't be mad about this. Just be, I've chosen to be a traditional LDer. And with that, do you mind if I group arguments? Now, we're going to talk about how you do this, but usually judges are pretty good about this. I've talked to many progressive LDers and LD judges who did progressive back in high school. They're all about the argumentation. Okay, so focus on that. Secondly, clarification during cross-examination. Don't be afraid to say you don't know what their case is saying. So you want to go through and really clarify. Now, you can kind of cut them off if they're trying to read their case to you because you're saying, no, can you please explain it in your own words? Basically, what is your value and value criterion? A lot of times they'll call this a standard instead of value criterion. But that's the framework, right? So it's important to kind of see, do they have that? Secondly, basically, do you have 3 main arguments? Do you have 2 main arguments? How many arguments do you kind of have? What are they? Just so we can write them down. And again, don't let them just read their stuff. Believe it or not, some progressive people just get something from online. They don't really know what it means, which is kind of embarrassing, I think. But I've actually seen this in rounds where the other LDers is trying to figure out what they're running and the person running it doesn't know what's going on, right? So this is a good time to get them to say it in their own words. Okay, so clarify during cross-ex and don't feel stupid saying, I'm not quite sure what your case is, so help me understand. Okay, judge will be impressed. All right. There aren't points or contentions again. Ask how many arguments, ask them value criterion. Okay. Now that you understand their case, you can group their evidence cards and attack them well. So what do I mean by group? You're going to put their arguments that are very similar together or their evidence that is similar together and attack all 3 of those at once, right? Or all 4 of those at once, or 2 of those at once, showing your attack takes down all of the arguments they presented. Later, if they say you didn't attack a certain card, right, or piece of evidence, you say that you attack the argument as a whole and your argument stands and still outweighs, or your argument stands and takes all of these cards down. Now, you're going to notice that in progressive LD, they like to flow card authors and dates and use those throughout the round. So a traditional LDer is usually writing down the value criterion, contention 1, subpoint A, things like that. What you do want to do during your prep time is just quickly write down the authors and dates of those cards that they read. Because through the rest of the round, instead of saying, to my first argument, this, right? They're going to say to the Anderson card, you can see that this outweighs. And you won't know where that is unless you kind of write those down. Now, a couple of things. When you walk in the room and you're talking to the judge and you're saying, I'm more traditional, you can say, are you okay if I look over the other debater's shoulder? And debater, are you okay? Progressive LDers have this all the time. A kid will walk, stand up, walk over as they're reading and literally flow while looking over their shoulder. I know this seems weird, but it's totally doable. Just, throw it out there before the round. Usually progressive totally get that. All right. That way, as you're flowing the arguments, you can also flow the card, the author, and the date. Okay. All right. Here we go. Try to flow the authors and dates. You kind of got this. I know you might be frustrated at first changing things up, but let's have a growth mindset. Learn this a little bit more because now you'll be able to do both traditional and progressive. A lot of progressives can't go back to traditional and they end up losing a lot of rounds because of it. So just know if you're able to do both, you're probably going to take state, right? You're going to do a great job. All right. I'm going to go through some policy arguments that progressive LDers might use. It's not as confusing as they may sound. And again, there will be coaches who are much better at this than I am. I am literally dumbing this down, but it seems to work. So here we go. All right. No one be offended. All right. The disadvantage, also called a DA or a disad. So just kind of listen for that lingo. The disad is basically saying, here is one of the huge disadvantages to doing this topic, right? But instead of having it as like a negative case, they're going to make it like off case, which means they're just going to flow it on a separate sheet of paper and they're going to lay it out with this whole link story, right? So if you're traditional, you might have contention 1. The disadvantages to doing this are this and this and this, and it's going to lead to economic collapse. The progressive LDer is basically doing the same thing, but they're really going to lay out an entire link story, right? This is going to lead to this, which leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this horrible impact. All right. So negative cases do this anyway. It's just not called a disad. It's just called their negative case. So don't worry about it. If they have off case, I'm going to go through each one of those. All right. That just means it's flowed on a separate sheet of paper. It might do you good to also flow it on a separate sheet of paper and just have extra pieces of paper ahead of time. Okay. What you can do with the disad is destroy one of the links in the disad, right? Because if they have this link story that doing this plan will lead to education being hurt, and education being hurt leads to people dropping out of school, which then leads to the prison pipeline, which then destroys the economy, and you destroy one of those links, you destroy the disad, right? So just know it's not as complicated as you think. And I think they actually spend too much time doing like one whole disad when they could have, summarized the arguments and the evidence. So, okay, topicality or T. Topicality or T is saying affirmative is running a case that doesn't meet the specifications of the topic, so they should lose. For instance, if affirmative was running a compulsory service case that was letting people volunteer instead, they would not be topical because they're not meeting the definition of compulsory. Okay, so if someone's running a topicality or T on you, which, isn't super usual. I've seen a lot of progressive rounds, and they, I don't see it run very often, but just so you know. Traditional debaters should not run a T. The reason why, it's written in a certain way. Like if you really want to talk about that, you can. But really, what you do in traditional doesn't really meet up with the whole topicality thing unless they're completely off topic. But again, a progressive can run almost anything, and we're going to go through those, all right? If they do run topicality on you, just be sure and ask and cross-ex how you don't meet the resolution, and then prove it during your next speech. Again, they probably wasted a lot of time going through each of the things to meet like a topicality argument. So just go through and destroy those. Okay, that'll also be on a separate sheet of paper if you want. Okay. Counterplans. Counterplans are just saying, hey, instead of doing the topic, which leads to all these horrible things happening, there's a better way to get the benefits that the affirmative wants. So in this month's topic on compulsory service, I've seen a lot of people putting a counterplan in their negative case, even if they don't call it a counterplan, saying voluntary service is better than compulsory. Now, it may not be written out like a formal counterplan, but you can see any negative case, even a traditional one that presents an alternative, is basically running a counterplan. All right. So how do you take it down? How do you take down a counterplan when, hey, voluntary sounds pretty good too? The very best way to take down a counterplan is to ask yourself this: can the U.S. do both at the same time? Okay. Can the U.S. do both at the same time? If the answer is yes, then you as the affirmative can tell the judge, cool, voluntary service is good, and we should open that possibility up, but it doesn't negate the topic because we can also do compulsory service at the same time as asking for volunteers. Does that make sense? If you can do both, they didn't negate the topic. They just said, hey, here's a lovely thing you can do. So if you're going to run a sort of counter plan, you can't do it, at the same time. So let's say they were running a counter plan on the states should do it instead of the United States. Then you would have to attack it and show how it's better overall to perhaps do it as a nation. All right. This is called perming or perm or permutation. So if they say to the permutation or perm, you'll know we want to do both at the same time. So on that topic, this whole thing came about because someone was asking about plans in LD debate. Every once in a while, you'll run into someone with a plan, okay? But here's the thing. Plans can be more easily taken down because they're specifying, right? So like, where's the money coming from? How is this going to be implemented? How many years? You can get very specific and take down various parts of their very specific plan. So you can see that by being more vague as to exactly what the plan is, that could help you on affirmative. So I think in this one, a plan actually could hurt you. Okay? Don't say it's against LD rules because it's really not. So, yeah. All right. The next thing is theory. I hate theory. I've never voted on theory. This is basically what theory says. Theory is basically saying, it's not fair. There's no way I could have prepared for this argument. It destroys the education of debate. How dare they do this argument? It's not fair. Okay? Resist the temptation as a traditional debater to run theory because it is a progressive argument and you're already like slipping into progressive if you start to run theory. I think as a judge, it sounds like whining. And usually isn't run on some crazy thing that their opponent is running. So in one round that I judged, I think this was like semis or quarterfinals at a tournament, one debater said, it's not fair. I couldn't have prepared for this crazy stuff that the affirmative is running. The other debater stands up and says, I saw you talking to some of my opponents before the round and looking at the flows. Obviously, you knew what I was running. The entire crosshatch went back and forth like this, and I was just so irritated. I wanted them to move on to the actual argumentation and not, it's not fair. Okay, so again, if a traditional debater tries to run theory without it formally being written down, it really sounds like whining. So just don't do it. Use your brain to defeat their arguments or outweigh their arguments. Okay, the critique, or K, is the thing that I think scares a lot of traditional debaters. So let's go over what some of them are. You're welcome to talk to your policy people too. Again, I'm simplifying this down, but to tell you the truth, it seems to work. So the critique does not need to be on the topic. The debater that runs a K, or critique, is like a pirate taking over the round. If they win the K, they win the debate because it comes a priori for the judge, which means it comes first before anything else. So it can take lots of forms, and these are just off the top of my head. There may be others, but we'll go over these really quick. So first, criticizing the topic itself. Second, criticizing the language their opponent uses. Third, bringing up a social issue topic they feel strongly about. And fourth, generally saying this kind of thinking is what leads to the destruction of all society. Let's go through these. Okay, first, criticizing the topic. One of the only cases I've seen that actually seemed like important to debate, right? This one month when the topic was on whether a domestic violence victim would be justified to kill their abuser, a K was written and run that said, how dare we have this topic when some debaters are domestic violence victims, and now you're making them defend their abuser. In one round, a debater read this K. Their opponent stood up, paused, then said, I agree with this K because that's me. That debater broke down crying and ran out of the room. And you can see that K may have been justified, right? Hopefully, maybe that story got back to the NSDA and they were a little more careful about topics that they wrote. Another justified K, which I found really interesting, it was run in the movie Resolved, which is about policy, okay? But these poor African-American debaters on the college circuit, I believe they were from Long Beach, they were running a K in these rounds that debaters who were poor couldn't pay for debate camps where most debaters got their evidence. So poor debaters couldn't compete against these rich debaters who can afford debate camp and to buy all of this evidence. When they did this, the Free Evidence Project didn't exist. And they made a really good point. And because of that, the Free Evidence Project was created, where all policy evidence from camps is uploaded to the National Debate Education Association, National Debate Coaches Association on their website for everyone to use. And even you can go find Ks and answers to Ks on that. Again, I would say if you're wanting to do progressive, don't run generic things. A generic K rarely wins, just so you know. Okay, criticizing the language of the opponents. Before you begin a round, do you say, are you guys ready? Well, don't do that because you just fell into a feminism K that says we use the word guys, ignoring the fact all girls are important too. They've been held back by the masculine norm. Okay. Many debaters will still run a fem K as a social issue, but we'll talk about this just a little bit later. Another one was on a topic that deals with terrorism. The K was that we shouldn't talk about terrorism because that is what terrorists want. That makes them stronger. So their opponents are making terrorists stronger just by like talking about how effective terrorists were. So you can see that's a thing too. I'm going to talk about how you take these down. Okay. Social issue Ks. These kind of bother me because, well, they bother me the most. Because basically they really are a pirate taking over the round. They don't have to have anything to do with the topic at hand. Sometimes a debater feels so strongly about an issue, they ignore the topic altogether. They make the LD round a platform so they can talk about their social issue, such as animal rights or women's rights or LGBTQ issues. So this sort of K is very confusing to a traditional debater because they aren't even talking about the topic. Right? And it puts them in this opposition. And you don't want to be against, animal rights or women's rights or whatever. All right. So how do you attack this K without sounding like you're against animal rights or women's rights or LGBTQ rights? It all comes down to the role of the ballot. So in cross-ex, it's vitally important to ask the debater if them winning the round will actually help the social issue they're talking about. And how? How will a ballot that is signed ends up going in a pile in the tab room and over to your school going to change anything? The only people who look at it are the judge, like the coaches, maybe the debaters who were in the round. The tab room just looks at the score, right? So in that case, like, is the ballot actually making a difference, right? Aren't you actually creating an enemy in me against your issue because you took over the round and kind of disregarded the topic, right? You don't want to make me an enemy. So you can kind of say, I prepared hard for this topic. I want to help you with your social issue. How about I get the win because I care about winning the round? I'll join with you to spread your message. You can come back and talk to my team. We'll start a Facebook group. Right? So isn't that better solvency for this social issue that we have? So during the speech, remind the judge that the role of the ballot is to choose a winner in the debate itself on this topic. And if you win, you're going to help spread the word on this important social issue by taking the debater back to your team, having them present their critique. Okay, so role of the ballot, unless they can show that the role of the ballot, that the ballot itself is going to change something about their social issue, without making you an enemy of it now, then they shouldn't win the debate. Okay? Critiques that aren't really critiques to me, I'm sure people would disagree, but these critiques are run all the time. You hear about the generic cap K. Capitalism is bad and leads to the destruction of society. It's the root of all evil. Neg side promotes capitalism. They should lose because capitalism is evil and they are promoting this. How about the biopower K? This basically says their opponents are giving more power to the government, which is horrible and will lead to the destruction of society. Government is evil. Ask your policy people about any others, but by calling this a K instead of just saying it's part of your case, it becomes a priori in the round and you have to defeat it to win. Want to know how to take this one down and others, right? Besides the social issues K, here we go. How to defeat a K from my point of view, after I've talked to some progressive people, it seems to work. I'm sure that there are more detailed things, so, probably talk to your policy people. But first of all, make them explain it in their own words in cross-examination. Many lazy progressives grab a K online, glance at it, and run it without truly understanding it or even truly believing it, right? So make them explain it. Second, ask them what the alternative is. What is the alternative to capitalism? Socialism? Should the US become a society like North Korea? Because there are far less human rights under such a system. Capitalism may not be perfect, but it's the best of the options that we have. With capitalism, more people do get taken care of because there's more money that can then go to feeding people with food stamps or things like that, right? So ask them what the alternative is. They may say, I don't have to have an alternative. I'm just saying capitalism is bad and you're defending capitalism. But remind the judge during your speech, they do need an alternative, because if you reject capitalism, that means you are inviting some other form in, right? So ask what the alternative is, and then make sure that you explain to the judge that they should have an alternative. What's the alternative to giving government power, like the biopower? Giving them no power? Do we have anarchy, right? Run through the impacts of anarchy versus giving the government a little more power under the topic. Make sure you follow through on the impacts of anarchy. Don't just say, so now we're going to have anarchy. Show the harms of anarchy. Show the harms of socialism. Okay, again, I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to simplify LD. All right. Here is something that I kind of tell my traditionals. You have smart progressive versus lazy progressive. I would say a lot of progressives are super smart, and those are very enjoyable rounds for me to watch. Some are lazy progressives. Basically, the lazy just grab disads or Ks online, know they're going to confuse their traditional opponents, and in that they can end up winning just because of the confusion, right? A smart progressive, like, really puts themselves in. They do some of their own research. They truly understand their arguments. But I would say, like, out of all of the rounds I've seen of progressive versus traditional, or even progressive versus progressive, I've seen more lazy progressives than smart progressives. Again, if you're a progressive, be a smart one. Where they're just running like some generic disad or some generic counterplan or some generic K that they found online. And yeah, to me, those are taken down easily because they really didn't do the work behind them. So just make them fully explain it top to bottom. And I think that you'll find in CrossX you can take down a lot of things. Okay, you can do this. If you're a progressive, please don't try the stupid trick of just trying to baffle your opponents. That's why so many traditional debaters quit. Don't say, oh, that's good for me. No, it's not good for you. It's not good for your school. Keep LD alive. Run your progressive stuff, but run it smartly. Treat your opponent, whether they're progressive or traditional, with great respect. Traditional debaters, don't get caught up in being so mad that the progressive debater is running arguments that you don't like, that you're all mad about it and you refuse to engage in it. You can do this. Engage with the arguments and use your brain. You can do it. I have seen round after round of brilliant progressive debaters versus brilliant traditional debaters. It all comes down to knowing each other's language and showing respect and showing that your arguments win in the end, right? That you have those great voting issues at the end. Okay, with that, I think that was the end of the PowerPoint. My son, Nico, I sent this to him. He added a few more things. I did send this in an email to the coaches. I'll try and add it also to the PowerPoint. So let's see. At the beginning of the round, let them know that you don't keep up with speed. If they could go a little slower, that would be great. So you can kind of ask the debater if they would, right? That's super nice. Second, ask if it's okay to read over your shoulder. So we did talk about that a little bit. Practice and stay open to other ideas. That's kind of what I'm talking to you about. You might think spreading is the worst, but people are doing it. It might be worth trying to flow a few fast rounds on YouTube or at tournaments. If you just stay dedicated a day, a week to try and flow around online, you would probably pick it up quite easily. So watch some of those. Let's see. If you knew your opponent was running a wonky value or argument before the round, you could even research it so that you could beat it. Same logic applies to speed. You know your opponent is using that strategy, so practice to beat it. Practice some shorthand to get better at flowing. Write small. Have real short ways that you can put things down. For topicality, T, critique, K. Have a primary goal while practicing flowing. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. Progressive debater arguments stretch the bounds sometimes. So just think of a world where they were saying what was actually true. They're saying that we should always prioritize nature over human life. The key is to take a deep breath, ignore their jibber jabber, and just think about what that would actually look like if we're listening to their author. Then describe that reality to the judge. Progressives like to think way outside of the box sometimes, right? So sure, it's cool to kill all the people as long as the earth can start over. Those sorts of things. So describe that reality to the judge. I think it's safe to say that the experts they are quoting about these crazy claims aren't actually following them, or they're just as experienced with making life decisions as anyone else. There are philosophers that say nature is better than human life, yet they drive a gas guzzling car, give speeches at venues, running electricity from coal, and publish a book knowing full well a whole bunch of trees are going to be cut down for their printing. So, with regular evidence, if someone finds the author said or did something contradictory, they are immediately discredited. I think debaters can easily discredit the crazies of the world because just living discredits a lot of them. If the golden faced behind the philosophical idea can't follow through on their thoughts, then neither should we. And you are welcome to ask them who their authors are of these ideas, right? What is their background? What's going on? And that's another way to take down progressive arguments, is like defeat those authors. And if they don't know who they are, good for you, right? If we don't know who they are, why would we ever listen to them? Okay, I hope that helped. If your coaches or you have any questions, you can certainly email me. But I would say, like, go talk to your policy people. Just keep it simple, and you can do this. Good luck, everybody. See you later.